the Skull Sessions with Dan Henk, and today my guest is Jonathan Pruitt. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, Jonathan Pruitt.
Okay. So, Jonathan, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you've got going on?
Yeah, let's see. So I have a book coming out I guess, on Tuesday called The Amber Menhir, which is a dark fantasy featuring a vampiric set of intellectuals who have convinced the world, perhaps rightfully, perhaps wrongfully, that the world is in grave danger. And the only way to overcome this danger, at least hypothetically, is magic. And they're trying to invent new kinds of magic that might try to save the world or might save the world, but magic is expensive and will cost a lot of blood in order to try to figure out how do we circumvent this forthcoming disaster. We follow three bright-eyed and bushy-tailed young entrants to one of these magical institutions of learning and research, and they go there with the understanding that these three unsuspecting individuals are going to help save the world. And then after they get there, they realize that the inside of these magical institutions called menhirs are wriggling with infighting and intrigues and politics, and that students themselves quickly become immersed in these plots, and more than your grades are at stake.
So, would you consider it a little bit more thriller, horror, speculative fiction?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I call it dark fantasy. So, like, I don't shy away from sex. I don't shy away from drugs. I don't shy away from differences in class and power dynamics that could cause indigestion in some. But it's fantasy, but it's not jubilant, merrily clapping along. There aren't magical dragons or flying
Right.
dogs or anything that make all of your
The
dreams
vampires
come true.
don't sparkle.
No, no, they don't. I mean, like, and I genuflect, I freely admit that that worked out really well for some authors, but those aren't my kind of vampires. My kind of vampires, all these, these people they're not quite literally vampires. They're not living for forever, at least most of them. But in order to get their magic to work, they have to draw upon their own vitality or that of others, and that means that everybody bleeds in order to make these vampires' magic work. So yeah, so they're not sparkly vampires. They're I call them vampiric, but not quite technically vampires by the conventional sense. They're not drinking the blood most of the time. They eat normal food. But yeah, so dark fantasy, but also horror. There are scenes that I am graphic and that I convey horror elements, things that are intended to be menacing. And so, among its designations are horror, dark fantasy, and then probably epic fantasy as well. So, like, although it revels in the dark, although it's sort of like a White Wolf, vampire 1990s sort of feel to it in the background. There's still hope that moves through the storyline, and there's never a moment in time where you think everything is lost and there is no way out. So there's an epic fantasy element to it, although my characters are not infinitely powerful and they have lots and lots of flaws that make them both relatable and annoying.
Would you say that you're a little bit more influenced by like the Ayn Rand style of vampire,
Oh,
the 38 Days Later,
oh
or
yeah, yeah. So, and I mean, like Interview with the Vampire and Vampire Lestat and all those Anne Ricey type. So, I'm actually Ayn Rand and Anne Rice both influenced me, Ayn and Anne's. So, I grew up basically reading Anne Rice's novels, Interview with the Vampire, Vampire Lestat, Queen of the Damned, that sort of ilk, and then every kind of game and whatnot that occurred from the 90s to now that you could imagine. There's dragons and White Wolf and L5Rs. I mean, I'm an avid role-playing game fanatic as well. A different number of video games. Although I draw inspiration from those things and admire them, I try to develop my own sort of narration style and setting. But and Rand, I'm going to call her objective. She's more libertarian. I'm inspired by her too. So I am sort of twin speaking my way through this novel, where we're following a storyline of
is
three
she like
characters.
I don't know about her politics that much. Like I'm pretty libertarian. I love like
Okay.
Ayn Rand changed my world. When I first
Yeah.
read Alex Shrugged, but I didn't know that. Like I know Ayn Rand kind of did like this. She wrote about religion, then she became religious. I don't know what she is now. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think, my impression is that in my mind, I think of Ayn Rand, or I guess technically she made up her name, so it's supposed to be Ayn Rand, so it
uh,
rhymes with line, but like I'm going to say that incorrectly the whole way through. So I really apologize for that. But
okay.
she I think she was atheist mostly, although I think of Jewish descent. And then she sort of wrote these books that were supposed to say like collectivism in general is bad, that you should not be enslaved to try to work towards the total movement forward of society. There are no human rights, there are no animal rights. That society evolves, develops most effectively if each individual member of society tries to do what's best for themselves, try to push their own ideas, and that there's a survival of the fittest element to ideas and businesses and things like that that help the strongest ideas come out on top, and that should help propel society forward. And I don't think that she thought that collectivism itself was evil, but I think that she thought that people aren't good at executing collectivism, and that notions of like for the greater good can be demonized very easily and turned into something evil and adulterated. And so she just thought, like in the hands of humans, things like collectivism don't work very well. And so, I think that's my impression of her. And her books sort of echo that time and again. In my world, there is a collectivism as well. So everyone is feeding into this system, these menhirs. So, like the Amber Menhir, the title of the book, is one of these magical institutions, and there are several across this world, across this continent. And these scholars live inside of these menhirs, and they are sincerely trying to develop magics that might help save the world. But they're basically bleeding the masses by the millions in order to try to conduct this research that might save everybody, or it might fail. No one knows. But the fact that there's a severing between the people who are conducting these magical studies and are educating the occult elite. And the broader masses has enabled them to become quite evil and sort of callous to the effects they have on the people outside of these schools. And so I think that there's a shared element of collectivism and for the greater good being used as a mechanism of harming society and helping an elite few. Although, my idea of utopia and hers and precisely how I'm conveying my dystopia, because it is a dystopian fantasy as well, or sci-fi. But we both use utopias and dystopias to sort of push our ideas and perspectives forward, or even just think aloud, or on page. I think we're both doing that. But what we're prescribing in the end, what we think will correct these dystopias that we create, are slightly different. So, she had total focus on the individual, at least mostly. And then for myself, I don't precisely know how the series will end. So the first book is coming out in October. The second one is coming out next year. The Eggs Inside is drafted, and the third one, Hives of Glass, is also drafted. So the next two are drafted, but they're a long way from ready for seeing prime time. But I don't exactly know how it will end. I have ideas, but I think what I prescribe in the end to solve these problems will be different from what she advocated. But we'll see. So I like Ayn Rand, although she's a very unpopular entity. Most literary circles, you say Ayn Rand, and people blanch. I quite admire her, and uh, I would be
Well, yeah,
flattered if.
I don't agree with her 100%, which she
Yeah.
probably would have hated. But I don't agree with her 100%. But I think that she had like some very important stuff to say. You
Yeah.
know, but
Well, she can't. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, did you see the movie Daybreakers?
No, I did not. What's the premise?
It's basically it's a world of vampires, like vampires are kind of taken over, and
Hmm.
there's some humans left, and
Hmm.
they try to round them up so that they can drain them for blood.
Yeah, sure.
And they're running out of people, and so
Oh,
they're having
neat.
like food shortages, and like
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you want to see collectivism, it's like I think Sam Neill plays the big bad guy,
Hmm.
and like they're kind of controlling everything, controlling who gets the blood, who doesn't get the blood, and they at least get obviously more blood than the working class people, and there are all sorts of revolts, and it's
Oh,
a
I
good
love it.
movie. I enjoy it.
Yeah, my love. I mean, it's a tragedy of the commons. Like there are a limited number of. Let's imagine that humans in this case are dairy cows, and there's a limited amount of blood milk that can come out of them, and there are a large number of these vampiric consumers of these blood, and then there's a class system even within the vampires themselves. And then if everybody tries to glut out on the limited number of milk cows left in the barn, then they'll all die. I mean, it creates interesting power struggles if you have a limited resource that everyone individually wants to take as much of as they can. But if everyone does that, the resource will perish. The humans will go extinct, and then all the vampires, I guess, they drink each other and diablerize each other, and then they all die. Like, who know, I mean, I would love to know, like, what do they think will happen if all the humans die? And maybe you could breed the humans. Were they breeding the humans? I mean, humans are
What
reproductive.
Daybreakers?
Yeah, yeah.
They were like they keep them in cages. So it was like they were almost breeding them, like play live freely, but when they
Yeah.
capture them, they keep some in cages, and
Dang.
so
That's
yeah,
fun.
it's kind of a cool concept.
Yeah, I love it.
I see it's like a B plus movie.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
obviously like a big budget and go to it, but I love the story. I think it's a great story. And it's well done. There's no like really bad CGI or anything.
Yeah. I mean, B plus is still a passing grade. Just to be clear,
Right,
lots of power.
right. Oh,
Lot.
I see way worse horror movies. Yeah, no,
Well,
it's one of the better ones. I like it.
I mean, horror movies have that wonderful. I mean, the horror genre in general. I mean, I don't know if it translates well into novels, but some of my favorite elements of horror movies are when things don't go that well. Where you're like, yeah,
Right.
that's cringy horror movies are still fabulous horror movies. Just the way in which I appreciate and savor those stories and storytelling can become quite different. Like so I can enjoy genuine fright, and then I can enjoy um, playful elements of horror. And someone like Wes Craven alternates back and forth between the two. And I like mixing
His early
horror.
movies are awesome, like in
Yeah,
Nightmare on
yeah,
Elm Street and stuff like that.
yeah.
Like it feels like he kind of like went downhill later on, but uh, a lot of people do.
Yeah, at some point, so we're all going to be competing against ourselves. Let's imagine, let's play a total fantasy right now. I'm a fantasy writer, so let's imagine this fantasy book is wonderfully successful. Let's imagine it upsets the academics, and they buy it by the thousands, and there's a counterculture that develops, and I ride this through fame and fortune. Let's imagine, total fantasy. There will come a time in my life where I am older, and I'm competing with a younger version of myself. And at some point, like more experience, I might get better at writing stories and navigating plot lines and things like that. I hope that that's true. But there will come a time when I'll peak. And then thereafter, I'll begin to ebb, and people will continue to compare me, probably unfavorably, to my past. But like, I don't. Where do you put Scream? So like, Scream is relatively late relative to Nightmare on Elm Street, but I love Scream. I mean, I think it was there are jump scares and there's a fright element, but like John Carpenter gets a wing, and and Wes Craven's making fun of himself, and the dumb teenagers like getting caught in a cat door or whatever. Like, I could totally get into that, and maybe I have to have adult beverages to
I
enjoy
mean,
it, but
I
I
see
like it.
I see what it's going for, but it
Yeah,
that to me probably when I saw it, it just wasn't serious enough. I wanted something
yeah,
more serious.
yeah.
But like even less than Wes Craven, if you take like Toby Hooper who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
Oh
which I
yeah.
thought is an amazing movie.
Oh
And
yeah.
then I remember you know obviously they came out like 1978, but it was like I don't know, like the early 2000s. And I was on a date, and I was like, "This is back when we had Blockbuster."
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
like we saw at Blockbuster, they didn't have any movies. We're looking at the horror section. I found this movie called Mortuary, or
Yeah.
I think that's the name of it, by Toby
Sure.
Hooper. I was like,
Mhm.
"Well, how bad can it be?" It's Toby Hooper, dude. Bad, really, really bad. I was like, "Wow."
Yeah.
From the guy who did one of the best movies, in my opinion, ever, to there's a huge
Yeah.
drop off. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I mean, a lot of people kind of do this like slow incline and decline, like
Yeah.
George Romero. Like if you look at like some of his early stuff, like it's really good, ideas, but it's like kind of like slow, methodical,
Mhm.
dragged out storytelling, like the Crazies. I
Yeah.
actually thought the remake of the Crazies was better because
Mhm.
it was like more like to the point. But you could tell like he did that, and then he inclined he did Dawn of the Dead, which I thought was amazing. I thought that was a
Yeah.
peak.
Sure. Yeah.
And then it went down. I don't know if you saw his last few movies like Diary of the Dead and stuff. They're not that
Mm.
good.
I know of them. So, there are a couple of things. I think one, it could just be senescence. Like people are getting older and so they just aren't as creative, blah, blah, blah. Another thing that can happen is that after you get powerful and enough notoriety, you get to do what you want without getting edited as much and without like reevaluating your
Right.
ideas. Like when you're new, one, you solicit lots of views, you take them very seriously, and
And you're
people
kind of that
and
sense
people
like I'm the genius here. I make
yeah.
all this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Versus later on, if you're not listening to people so much, it's easier to be tone deaf and the difference between a good movie and a good story and one that's like clunky and has bad pacing is oftentimes just a little bit of editing. You can turn a dull story into a fast-paced story by just jiggling a small number of items around. So it could be that you're getting older. It could be that you are not listening to people as much as you used to. And then the last thing is you might be taking more risks. So like once you've established some wealth, once you have a history behind you, they might be just trying to like, okay, just trying ideas that are off the wall because they're okay with failure. And the difference between something fabulous and a failure, oftentimes it's like again, very small differences. So
I think you named a couple of elements that probably all went into that. Like part is like not listening to other people, like thinking I have my vision, I'm right, you're wrong, and not listening to feedback. There's a lot of stuff, but I think like a couple of those elements, especially into like George Romero's later work, like Diary of the Dead, Survival of the Dead, and stuff like that, because they just get like it seemed like he had it going on with like Dawn of the Dead, and
mhm,
then like he starts to like bring all these new ideas that don't really go with the
mhm,
original
mhm.
concept, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh, so, yeah, I feel bad for artists as they age and their freshness deteriorates and how society treats them shifts and always keeping themselves. I feel for all of them, and part of there will eventually they also have to deal with nostalgia, right? The nostalgia that curls their early work almost becomes a poison for their later work. So like if there's enough nostalgia and enough celebration of their early pieces, then later works it's hard to live up to that over and over and over again. Like at
You
some
think
point the
maybe
best
some of that
version is gonna be over.
nostalgia is like nostalgia for their work? Like, hey,
Yeah,
look, I invented all this stuff. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So like at some point you're going to be competing with yourself, and if you were very successful in your past, people are going to want you to redo the same thing over and over and over again. And if you try anything different, they might punish you for it. But it can go either which way. But I do feel for all these people that become successful and then twist an ankle later on. So
Twisted ankle. That's a very nice way of
that's
putting
right. It's
it.
twist an ankle. So like, like, and then they hobble on. But so we'll see what happens with the Amber Menhir. I think. Um, I do think in this book, I'm still at a phase in my career where I listen to almost every critique, take it very seriously. I draw in men. I mean, again, I wrote this book on my own, but I poached talent from editors from the big five publishers, and to assist me to make sure that I was not dealing with eh, my own ideas so closely that I wasn't able to see when there were issues there. And the first version of this book was over 200,000 words long, and now the current version that you or anyone will listen to or see is 105,000 words. And a lot of those words that are there now were not there to begin with. So I think editing and listening to people again and again and again is what will allow most works to at least not twist an ankle. At least they will be good, they'll be serviceable, and the average person will like them. And so, and in everyone's defense, if you're writing a book, even if you're a genius, get an editor. And
Right.
if they tell you to do something, address it. That you don't have to necessarily do everything they say, but almost anything that an editor or a reader says is something you can act on to at least make the problem less pronounced and improve everyone's writing experience and listening experience and watching experience overall. So don't become vain, listen to other people, and the more you get complimented, don't let that poison you. You still need to listen to critiques.
Right. Well, I look at some of like my early stuff, and like
Mm,
people are like, "Oh man, this is amazing." I'm like,
mm.
why did you say that? What were you thinking?
Mhm.
Yeah, because like, yeah, they probably like the concept and they're like,
Mm,
they're good friends of mine or whatever,
mm,
but it's like, um, I think it could have done it better now,
mm.
much better. I'm sure everyone thinks that,
Yeah,
but, but,
yeah,
go ahead.
true. Oh no, I mean I rewrote or at least re-edited this first book several times. I had written a million words in the next two books, and then revisited the first book over and over again at various points, and thankfully hacked it apart. If I had published the first book or pushed it into prime time, after finishing it or after editing it five times, I think I would look back on it now and I would cringe or I'd feel self-consciously. But I think waiting years of editing before I actually let it loose, I think is uh, I'm pretty proud of the state that it's in. But if I look at my first few drafts, oh my God, they're so cringe. And I just read The Wheel of Time, which is like I don't know if you know what The Wheel of Time is. It's like
Yeah, yeah.
it's 14 enormous effing books,
Well,
and
they're
I
making you
love
can
it.
curse on the podcast, by the way. But
Yeah, I'm okay.
didn't
They're
they
making
make it like
14 effing
a
books.
Netflix series?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
watched the first season with one of my friends, and he actually has been kind of ill, so like I've been waiting, but I started to watch the second season with another. I I only like the villains in the Wheel of Time, so like I'm like oh blah blah blah. I mean like one of the three like Matt is all right. I think Matt Coffin. Anyway, so I think I like him among the major protagonists, and I like like some of the female protagonists a little bit, but really I just want to see what the Forsaken are doing. I want to see like Lanfear and Grendel and Mogadine and Ishamael. Like, I would rather hang out with them all day long and watch them do their thing. In fact, if Jordan Estate, I think his wife is still alive, Jordan Estate, if you are listening to this, I will give you one of my kidneys in exchange for writing a one-off as for if one of the Forsaken's angles. And one of my kidneys has a water cyst in it. You can have that one. What do you say? I would love to write it.
I would say, truth be told, I always like the villain better. Like it's
Yeah.
very rare that I don't like the villain better, and often the villain is kind of like a misunderstood monster or whatever. Like, or not even a monster, just viewed by society as a monster.
Yeah.
Like I think Frankenstein is a great
Oh yeah.
example of that. Like he creates Frankenstein, by the way, is a scientist. Like people get that wrong.
Yeah, Victor Frankenstein. He's
Yeah.
the one that he was the
But
scientist who
he
made
creates this
the monster.
creature, and then this creature is just harassed and chased, and people try to
Yeah.
kill it, and like
Uh,
yeah, it acts out, but I'm like that poor creature, you know.
yeah. And you don't hear about it. So like, and it's the very end of Frankenstein. Like so like kids. So I teach Catholic minors biology during the day, which sounds illegal, but it's not. So I mean, but they read Frankenstein, and the kids have the hardest time. What first off, it's florid and Victorian sounding, and actually, and my writing style is sort of um, it has a Baroque element to it as well. If you begin to read it, bear in mind there are moments that are a little bit. It's it's not Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's
Wait,
not
would you
Mary
say,
Shelley.
yeah, yeah, that Nathaniel Hawthorne's a little hard to read. I read all that
Yeah,
stuff. I'm an avid reader, so I read all
yeah,
that stuff in high school. But like the Scarlet Letter is a hard book to read. You
and like
know,
a 10th grader's supposed to read that. Like I can read it now and think, oh, how beautiful, but like
right?
it at 10th grade. I mean, so anyway, so ninth graders here have to read Frank or get to read Frankenstein, and they're like, "What's the point? What's the point?" I'm like, at the very end of this
I
thing.
don't think
Um,
Frankenstein's really a hard read though.
no,
Like
well, I mean, it's
compared to some other stuff, yeah.
yeah, like or, I don't want to get too cynical, but like high schoolers reading anything that's longer than about a minute, like it becomes hard for them, and they like that. Like shows are fast paced, books are fast paced, movies are fast paced, and so like I have a I'll go into my writing style in a second. But anyway, back to Frankenstein. Like at the end of this book, almost the very end, the monster's going to have a little soliloquy in a window, and that monster's going to explain to you a completely different perspective that explains it and basically rationalizes, I think, effectively the perspective of the entire book. All these murders, all this chaos, all this this monster seems to be villainous until the very end, and you realize ooh, maybe Victor's the villain. And
Yeah.
that's what's powerful about that book is that there's a villain, there's a bad guy, there's a bad guy, there's a bad guy, and then you're like, oh wait, turns out this thing's just a misunderstood creature, and both Victor's Frankenstein and his creation have a unique have a perspective that's worth hearing out and airing. But yeah, that's you're basically waiting for that soliloquy. And when and about a third of the kids when they got to that moment when the monster explained their perspective, they got the book and they really liked it. The other two thirds were like, it wasn't worth it. Why didn't the monster just tell us that to begin with? And I'm like, well, shit. Okay, I guess I guess
Well,
that's this.
to be like a harsh and cruel real world about it, like some people delve a little deeper into stories than others.
Yeah, 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 that's
Like
right.
some
That's
people
right.
just want the flash and bang and whatever, and
Yeah.
then some people are like, "Hey, maybe there's more
Yeah, slow.
intricacies to this."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I so the way the first book and the second book are in fact there's two tiers of organization. Each book has a story arc of the three that are created so far, and I like that. I tried to model myself after the do you know the Dresden Files? Do you know Harry
yeah,
Dresden
yeah, yeah.
Files? Yeah, so like like starting around the third
Have you
book on
seen?
from
Sorry
that.
to interrupt, but have you seen The Strain?
No, wait, what?
It's
The Strain?
it's called The Strain. It's like based off a comic book, and they made into a Netflix series.
Huh?
It's written by Del Toro, and he had
Oh, cool.
illustrated it as a graphic
Yeah.
novel. It's like his take on vampires and like vampires slowly. It's really really good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was supposed to be. I think it was supposed to be 5 seasons total, and they
Mm,
cut it, so it ends
yeah.
up being 4 seasons. So the
Yeah.
first three are like
Great.
amazing, but the
Yeah.
last season just feels like Game of Thrones. Like
Yeah.
they just
Yeah, no, I'm
rush
about to
it.
say, I was like, it got Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like, those poor actors, poor George R. R. Martin, poor
yeah.
everyone involved. Like, I'm like, oh God, like, it was, I mean, just
That was
screw
the
the
best thing on
pooch.
TV
Yeah,
for the
yeah, yeah,
longest
I
time.
know, I
And
know,
then
I know,
all
I
of a
know.
sudden, like, once they
It,
ran out of source material, you kind of see the decline. And that last
yeah.
season is like, boom.
Yeah, I was like, okay, there's an ice dragon. I get, oh, we have dragons. Oh, we've killed one already. Oh, it's back, but it's back as an ice dragon. And I was like, maybe this is gonna be great. Maybe this is gonna be great. And then I heard it was an abridged season. And I thought, this is a very complex plane to land. And so, what are they gonna do? And so, that's another great series that I enjoyed. I loved the first three books, and the fourth and fifth. I was like, okay, I'm with you, but I'm looking forward to the sixth one. But then, the whole series elapsed between the whole movie series elapsed between the fifth book and the sixth book. And poor George R. R. Martin has been chastised for this out the wazoo. But yeah, now it's become a verb. Do not let your series end Game of Thrones style. Like, and just a
Well, there
slapdash.
was like a petition online, like
Oh,
150,000 people wanted that, last season reshot. Like,
uh,
I don't blame it. Like I said, it was like one of the best things on TV. Like, I do guest spots in like Scotland, and I see billboards for Game of Thrones. Like, everybody was watching that thing.
yeah.
Everybody was like on their seat. But the problem is, I think Hollywood always thinks they're smarter than the writers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and then they screwed the pooch so bad. That poor pooch. That poor
Uh,
scenario. I mean, just like,
Well, I heard, I don't know if it's 100%, but I heard that the writers were going to write the next trilogy for Star Wars.
oh
And,
my God.
and
Don't you
they,
dare.
well, hold on. So they wanted to get done with Game of Thrones so they could get on to Star Wars. And George R. R. Martin wanted, I think, 12 seasons total. And they said six. And the compromise was eight. And then that eighth one, they like truncated. And I think the episodes were originally supposed to be an hour and a half, and they became like standard episodes. But they just wanted to get out of the way. But they did such a horrible job that they got fired off Star Wars.
Yeah, I'm sure their contracts. I'm sure they had an exit clause in their contracts and still got out of them. I'm sure they all had golden parachutes. There are always shows that need to get finished for X, Y, and Z reasons, and so maybe they become the people who like stem off burst the arterial spray of blood and try to close these seasons out with some level of some level of respect. But what a beloved series that saved HBO for there was no more Sopranos, there's no more Sex in the City, and this was it kept HBO a must-see venue for almost a decade, and then at the very end, they
That's
had
why
it
I
finish.
subscribed. I was like, I want to see this when it comes out. I'll buy a subscription.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And
mean,
then they keep
God
like
bless them.
now they keep cutting like Raised by Wolves. They cut that. I don't know if you saw that, but I saw like
Mm-mm.
2 seasons of that. It seemed to be going somewhere, and they're like, "All right, done."
But the good news is, at least for real time, I enjoyed the first season, although the very last episode, I was like, all right, well, here's it felt rushed. But I haven't gotten to see it, the second season all that much. I just saw little glimmers. But my ears have told me that the second season is faster paced and people are enjoying it, and that the Sean Chan are popular among the broader society. So of watchers. So at least I think that Wheel of Time has a future for the next few seasons, and it has to. As a series, I think it could eliminate several of the books pretty easily, but um, I'm glad that they're giving it a little more airtime so that people can fall in love with it because I think it's a worthy franchise to show the broader public because reading 14,000 pages of Robert Jordan and Sanderson is more of a commitment than a lot of light readers are game for.
What kind of style does he have? I've never read any of his
Oh,
work.
Robert Jordan. So like Robert Jordan is I'd say the first three books were pretty fast paced in the series, but he's slower, right? You know, like he introduced a lot of storylines and had this world expand very broadly, but it's quite slow paced, which is why after I finished reading these 14 books, I was like, you know, I think I'm gonna begin to act on my interest in writing a fantasy novel series. And I think I was so heavily influenced by his style that the first book that I wrote was enormous. And so like there was a story, it was great, but it was asking a lot of readers as an untested author like myself to tolerate 200,000 words of me
Right.
explaining like
It can be hard
why
even
the
for Stephen King. Yeah.
yeah. Like look at the waving flowers in this field and
Yeah.
look at how beautiful I can be about and like and I remember one of my friends was like,
Yeah. No, I did that when I started out. I was like, I want to describe everything, you know. Then
yeah,
after a while,
no.
you're like, but you're ruining the pace.
Yeah, that's right. You're ruining the pace and even if you describe something with some level of detail, you can't. So once you become lean enough that you're moving the storyline forward, pausing to describe anything at any level of detail, it will feel abrupt. And so you almost have to like slowly approach a
Like
topic that you
meter
want
it.
to.
Yeah.
You have to meter it, and that scene and sequel thing. Like, so you can have a fast scene, and then you can have a scene where you reflect. You can have a fast scene, and you have a scene where you reflect, and ideally, you alternate those two, where you have a series of events, and then a moment in the next sequel scene where you have an opportunity to reflect on those, and that can be slower. So, like, you have this object that you recovered in this fight or this battle, or somebody dropped it, yada yada, or or you found a secret passageway, and then the next moment you can dwell on the finer elements of this thing, so you don't ruin the pacing of an action sequence. So, putting the details in the right setting, scene versus sequel, and then slowly metering up or metering down the level of detail so that if you have to describe something graphically or you have a really beautiful description that you want to convey, making sure that it doesn't stand out in the context of leaner writing. So I think by the midway point through all my books, I have the plot bus hit the characters about halfway through the book, and then everything from there is cause effect to the end. But normally it's the second quarter in the book that I do my description, and I'm really doing a complex setup. So like the first quarter is baiting raiders into fast-paced stuff, and like there's sex, or there's people doing drugs, there's a series of violent scenes, or there's political drama, and I do that for the first quarter to draw you in. Then the second quarter, I move the pieces around the board and set up a chemical chain reaction that's going to hit you halfway through this book, and then I have an igniting agent that connects the first half of the book to the second half, but then sets off a chain of cause and effect that takes you to the end. So, and in that second half, I do not allow myself moments to just perseverate on the finer details of some structure or something. From once the plot bus hits the characters, chain reaction to the end of the novel. The end. Done. So I do all of my slow stuff in the second quarter, which also I think is I'm afraid that's where a lot of people are going to be predisposed to set it down. So I have to be careful about that.
You have like there a bunch of influences. I think everybody has like every author has influences, but like there are different styles, and I've
Mm.
kind of come to the conclusion that I need to incorporate a number of styles. But like Lovecraft, I think has some good ideas. But
Yeah.
the problem with
His
Lovecraft is
execution
some of
though,
his
like
stuff is very florid, very purple prose, very of the era. So it kind of reads
yeah,
stiff, but the ideas are great. And
yeah.
then, like I love how descriptive like Steinbeck can be. Or
Oh,
I love how like realistic the characters of Stephen King are. Or like,
mm,
how kind of poetic the words of like Cormac McCarthy or like Neil
mm,
Gaiman are.
oh. Those are all. I'm ashamed of many of those things. Back to Lovecraft. I actually adore Lovecraft. I mean, even though he even though some of his short stories are sort of like stiff, but he did at least create enough of a world that a lot of the follow-up writers that have used his world. I mean, now he's in Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like the great old ones are in Dungeons and Dragons, and they're
Oh,
all over the
you would
place. Like,
love that. He loved people
yeah,
like
yeah.
taking and expanding on his mythos. He was like a big pen pal with
Mm,
Robert Howard from
mm.
Conan and all that stuff. So
I actually my
unfortunately, he
favorite.
died broke. But
Yeah, well, what did he have a bit of a drinking problem? I
no,
think
no, that's Poe.
yeah,
Poe
yeah, that's Poe. I
died.
was like, oh,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. He had the drinking and also was allergic to something. I think like, was he allergic to alcohol?
Lovecraft got stomach cancer, and he
Okay.
was so poor he didn't go to get it checked out for months, and then he finally. I mean, in those days he probably would have
Yeah,
died
yeah,
of
yeah. He
cancer
probably would have died
anyways.
anyway. Yeah,
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 but
yeah. Take
he
this
did
arsenic.
like it was way too late by the time he even
Mm,
got to the doctor. He was a bit agoraphobic. He's been like and
yeah,
like one thing people make a big deal about with like Lovecraft is like oh well he was racist, there was this, or he was that. Thing is he was a scared little boy. And
yeah,
you see him involved over time. I mean, he married a Jewish lady and moved to Brooklyn. So
yeah.
like he definitely he was scared and like trying to break out of his shell. And meanwhile he had like all these like his mom used to tell him
Mm.
he was too ugly to go outside and lock him in the closet.
Jesus. Oh,
so
God.
so obviously this is a tormented character,
Yeah.
but I think he came up with like that whole like
Yeah.
cosmic,
Yeah.
like entity, evil, whatever. I thought that was
Yeah.
weird. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, what do you know? Some of the most tortured people in our world produce the most lasting and creative um, stories and worlds and ideas. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a pity that he did not get to enjoy the level of success that and inspiration that he spawned, but also what a neat case study where somebody who had so much loss and so much pain turned it into something worthwhile for the whole world and created so much joy for others. So, I mean, genuflect to Lovecraft. In fact, my favorite board game is Cthulhu Wars, which is where do you know this game? It's asymmetrical factions, so like it's like Risk, except for each of you is playing a sect of cultists who are going to raise your great old one and have monsters come out of portals and whatnot. So basically, it's like Risk that's asymmetrical by factions,
That
and
sounds
each of
kind
you
of
is
cool. Yeah.
oh, it's a blast, it's a
I used to
blast. So
play Risk when I was a kid all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I have painted miniature versions of it. I think some of them are even on my Instagram. And so like, like I am is about that Magic the Gathering, like you name anything from sci-fi horror, goth, fantasy to gaming strategy. Like I'm all of those things, but like the tendrils of it go all the way through. So Lovecraft even produced my favorite game. If adult beverages plus
All
playing
beverages.
Cthulhu, yeah, 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 some fancy high octane beers and some Cthulhu Wars. That is my ideal Saturday, man. And the queues endgame pretty fast. It's only like a 3 hour game, which is pretty short for gaming standards.
Right. Yeah,
Okay,
well,
so
I play games that'll be like 3 hours,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, three. I mean, like Risk can take forever. Like God, you could like you can carry a child to term in a game of Risk. Just love it. Love it. Oh, okay. So let's see. Go ahead. I apologize. I've derailed this 10 million times. I apologize.
No, this is great. This is the candid conversation. I don't care about like I don't have like 10 like questions I
Yeah,
gotta
yeah, yeah,
ask.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Sometimes it's like that.
not for me.
Okay, that's
Uh,
good. I like it.
but all right. So we'll wrap this up before too long. Let me know what you got coming out, how to get a
Oh
hold of
yeah, yeah,
you.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and one thing I would like to ask is like a lot of people like they kind of focus on this their style of writing,
Oh yes,
and even when you know they don't mentally focus on it, you can still
yes.
tell they focused on it. Like maybe it
Yeah.
was intrinsic or whatever. Like some people prefer first person, some people prefer third
Mm,
person, some
mm.
people prefer past tense, some people prefer present tense, some people like they like short scripts where they like bang right to the action. Some people like a little bit of backstory. How would you say you work? What's your process?
So I decided not to take a lot of risks from a standpoint of perspective. So third person limited, past tense. And I alternate between five major POVs. And then I would say my goal was at the end to basically every sentence has to be propelling something about the story forward, or almost every sentence. And so, like, every single sentence of mine got a strip search or multiple strip searches to make sure that they were lean, hard, effective, and that it was reasonably fast paced. So, if you're seeing a description of something in the book, it's because something about that is relevant for the storyline, either immediately later on in the book or later on in the series. There are no philosophical pauses where where we're going to talk about the flags and how buttery the capon is for
The
that they're yapping
meat
at
is
dinner.
just so
Yeah,
green, and
yeah. And I can tolerate that as a reader, and I can really love it as a reader. But I assume that every reader who's reading my book is tapping their foot impatiently and waiting for me to say what I'm going to say and move on. So I try to say things beautifully. I still enjoy the writing process, and I enjoy alliteration and illusion, and I try and I'm playful about what I'm writing, but I'm also lean. I don't take your attention for granted. I don't take your time for granted. And if I can't get my story through in 400
so those
pages,
elements in moderation.
yeah, everything in moderation, I mean, all things in moderation, which is in except for in my personal life, I'm the exact opposite. I'm like anything worth doing is worth overdoing. That's how I live my personal life. But not writing, restraint, and but like I have a sort of I'm also sort of being satirical here. It's like the evil vampires that are trying to figure out magics to save the world and they're bleeding everybody. I'm poking fun at all sorts of things outside in society as well. And so, I try to mix dark humor, satire, a conventional fantasy structure here, and elements of horror in specific scenes. And that's really how I think of the book. So like readers have articulated, and some and reviewers have articulated that it's like a cutesy macabre, or like scathing and dark, or like cutesy macabre because there are cutesy elements to it, but it's also scathing. It sounds like what I'm saying is bladed, even is poking at things and making social commentary, and it is. But then I'm writing a concise story, so even though I'm making political statements along the way and social statements about society, I'm also clipping this train right along. We're like, no stops. This is the morning train. We've got to reduce the number of stops on the way to the station, so hold on tight.
Well, I noticed that people love to put tags on stuff, even when it's not even really appropriate. Like my latest book is called "The End of the World,"
Yeah.
so we have like a corrupt U.S. government and it falls apart, and like people are like, "Oh, this is political, Tom." I'm like, what do you mean political? I don't really go into
Yeah, yeah,
politics. I
yeah,
just
yeah,
say
yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
it was corrupt and fell apart.
And it was Hillary all along. There she was. Like,
Yeah, and
yeah, you didn't have
one
that
thing
moment.
I love is like it's like kind of like it happens here, and they say, "Oh well, Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide," or something,
Yeah.
and people are like, "Yeah, I'm sure he did," but like I remember in Russia, like right around the same time, there was some
Mm.
guy. He was a pedophile. Everyone knew he was a pedophile, and he got off on a sub technicality, and then he supposedly committed suicide by shooting himself in the back of the head twice.
Yeah, that well, I mean, but there was a whole retinue of those people, right? Like people who would just like they would go like people who were issues in the government would go swimming in the Arctic and get lost.
Yeah.
Like, there are lots of bad things that can happen to you in Russia if you're not
Yeah,
careful.
yeah. Or you end up like in the back of a car, or like I
Like what
think there
happened?
was some guy that criticized Putin, and he sent over a KGB agent, to like they put like a radioactive pellet in an umbrella and they stabbed him, and so he
I remember,
died.
and there was that gal.
Yeah.
Yeah. How horrible. I mean, also like, what a great inspiration for dystopian worlds. Like, you don't have to go look far in our world to find inspiration for fantasy and the darkest forms, right? So like, I think
Right.
I drew from elements of the real world when writing my horror elements of my fantasy novels, but yeah, our real world is a constant source of information, and real life is oftentimes stranger than fiction. So it's
Yeah.
hard to outstrange real life.
Yeah. Look at all the crazy wars and dictatorships and everything. There's a lot of stuff like people kind of only see it on the surface level, but Yeah, I won't delve into that because we'll be here all day talking about
Yeah,
that.
no, but I
But
mean, like, I'm happy to become friends for the next novel, or if this becomes a bestseller, I'm happy to have an encore encore visit.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but
we'll bring you back for the next one. Well, tell
yeah,
people how they can see this one, how they can get a hold
okay.
of you, how they can buy your shit and
Yeah.
give you money.
That's don't worry about me financially. I'm doing fine. I'm okay financially. But I would say you can find the Amber Menhir, the as in the article, the Amber, like the fossilized stone, Menhir, which are like westerns. They're standard stones in Western Europe. Menhir. So the Amber Menhir is the name of the book. My name is Jonathan Pruitt. You can find it on Kobo. You can find it on Barnes and Noble. And you can find it on Amazon. And you can get it in paperback or hardback or ebook. Right now it's 99 cents on Kobo and Barnes& Noble and Amazon for now. It will be available on audiobook later on this month. Jeremy Lee, who was in My Hero Academia and in Street Fighter and Cyberpunk 2077 and Sailor Moon, narrated the book. And so she is a fabulous actress, and I'm delighted to have landed her. And so she will have, she's done with her takes. She's going to have pickups in another week or two for just a couple of little things to shift, but then that should be out later on in October, and that is fabulous, man. She has an amazing vocal range, and so I was familiar with her from anime, and a lot of anime, no offense, anime, like a lot of anime girls sound alike, and so it was jubilant and happy and youthful. But she did this video game, Cyberpunk 2077, where she plays the main protagonist V as a female version, I think opposite Keanu Reeves, and she had grit and made things intimidating and like she was such a badass. But when I heard her takes on that, I thought, oh my god, I wonder if we can recruit her. We succeeded in landing her. So if you want, I mean, buy the ebook, yay, buy the ebook, buy every kind of the book. But like, if you are only gonna listen to one version of this book, get Jeremy Lee's version because she's gonna be fabulous, man. I can't. I her audition floored me. So later on this month, it's also going to be available in audiobook format from all of your major providers. I have a personal website, theshadowsofthemonolith.com, which is the name of the series, The Shadows of the Monolith. Also, if you incorrectly put in shadowsofthemonolith.com, it'll take you to the exact same place. So you can see my musings and what I'm doing in terms of writing for the sequels, the pacing there, and then just what's going on in the media about the book. We've succeeded in landing a lot of coverage for this book, so like starting on Tuesday, a bunch of stuff comes out in Britain, and then the following week, a bunch of stuff comes out domestically. And I think later on this month, there's a New York Magazine piece that profiles me and describes this book, blah blah blah. So like, I think, fingers crossed, I think the book is going to turn into something. Even if people hate me in the end, people will know about this book. So join the crowd, be part of the conversation. The Amber Menhir, the shadowsmoleth.com, Jonathan Pruitt. There you go.
Okay, one more question. Do you have a Amazon author page or like a
I
Twitter
do,
profile or
So
Facebook?
I don't Twitter, but I do have a Facebook. The Shadows of the Monolith at Facebook is my professional page, not my author page. The Shadows of the Monolith. My Instagram is Jonathan Pruitt author. I don't use Twitter. Actually, I was part of a huge international. This is another story
Oh,
for
so
another
now
time.
sex, yeah.
Yeah. I was part of a huge international scandal involving spiders. I'm the world's most infamous and evil spider biologist, and that's the only reason that people gave a crap about my fantasy book in the media is because I have this sort of like dappled and weird past. So I'm also a spider biologist by training, and there are some spider references in these
That's
books,
awesome.
but
Yeah.
yeah, it's fun. So like on Instagram, so anyway, I got lit up on Twitter back when it was cool to be canceled, and so I've been canceled. No offense, like you don't have to be too jealous, but I got canceled once on Twitter, so I was like, I think I'm just gonna get rid of Twitter because I was like, I have enough negative stuff I could focus on. So I was like, I closed down my Twitter account. It was like, this is enough negative stuff for me. But Instagram, Jonathan Pruitt author. Facebook, The Shadows of the Monolith as at Facebook, and then and The Shadows of the Monolith is my website, which has links to all of this as well.
I think last thing I'll say, I think it's sort of a badge of honor to be like when the PRC was reading that warning label on the records. Bands were fighting to get that label on the records because it
Yeah.
sell like twice as many copies.
Yeah, I've
So
been canceled out the wazoo. And then, I mean, the nice thing is that at least the rationale for why I got canceled appears like it's going to become mostly overturned in the end. But like, it was a wild ride, man. But when that was happening, I was like, what am I going to do the rest of my life? I started to write a fantasy novel, and you know what? it worked out pretty good. So, so I have to say, I don't recommend being canceled recreationally, but if you find yourself in that circumstance, you can do a lot with it.
All right, well, awesome. Congrats, man. Thanks for doing this. I hope your novel does really well. Do you have anything? Yeah, fingers crossed.
We'll see. Yeah,
You
well, no,
got, you got
on
anything
Tuesday
else you
I'll
want to
either be.
add?
No, not at all. I appreciate you having me here. I love your, I love checking out your horror elements, your background, and yeah, I'm looking forward to watching more of your shows.
Okay, awesome, man. All right, thanks for doing this.